All right. So anyway, we have two wonderful guests who have joined us, one from Colorado. For those of you who don't know, Jack Phillips never wanted the spotlight, but he's an individual for whom the spotlight shone brightly just for trying to live out his religious beliefs. In 2012, he became the personification of the religious battle in America when he refused to make a cake for a same-sex wedding, which would have been in contradiction to his religious beliefs. He was cited by the Colorado Civil Rights Division, and his case went all the way to the Supreme Court, when in 2018, he won a resounding 7-2 victory.
I hope what I said at the end.
Now, you would think that would be the end of it, but unfortunately, the anti-religious individuals within the Civil Rights Division were not done with him. They again cited him after he refused to make a cake that would have celebrated a gender reassignment surgery for a transgender individual. This was finally eventually dropped when evidence of their anti-religious bias came to light. However, undaunted and unwavered in his religious liberty, the attorneys in that case continued to pursue Jack and have now initiated a private lawsuit against him that is currently being litigated. He is joined today by Jake Warner. And Jake is keenly aware of the challenges of religious liberty in our country today, as he is an attorney for the Alliance Defending Freedom. This is an organization who doesn't simply want to win individual court battles, but wants to win a lasting victory through transformation of our society and our culture. Their core issues are religious liberty, the sanctity of life, and the protection of marriage and the family. Jake has personally dedicated his life to the protections of conscientious rights of Christians and defending Christians' right to exercise their religion outside of the coercion of government. Please help me welcome Jack Phillips and Jake Warner.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having Jack and I here this morning. It's just a real privilege and a real honor for us to share this time with you. So thank you, Pastor Thoma, for your warm invitation and welcome this morning. I'm Jake Warner. I'm legal counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom. ADF is a Christian legal ministry. We exist to keep doors open for the gospel. And we do this by advocating for religious freedom, the sanctity of life, and marriage and family. That's what you just heard. This means we often go to court, right? We go to the court of law as well as the court of public opinion. We have an in-house legal team that is comprised of more than 60 lawyers working alongside a network of more than 3,400 allied attorneys around the world. We also have a dedicated team of communications professionals committed to advocating biblical truth in the marketplace of ideas. These advocacy teams work together because courtroom decisions often reflect cultural convictions. We work hard to convince our friends and neighbors of both the beauty and benefit of biblical truth. So what do? In particular, I work on ADF's conscience teams. This means that I often represent Christian business owners who face severe punishment, in some cases even jail time, for living out their faith at work. One of the heroes that I get to represent is the man sitting beside me, Jack Phillips, a Colorado cake artist. You probably know the story by now, but back in 2012, the state of Colorado tried to use its public accommodation law to force Jack to create a cake that would express a message that conflicts with his sincerely held beliefs. Or in other words, the state tried to punish him for declining to create a cake that would celebrate a same-sex marriage, something that goes completely contrary to Jack's biblical beliefs about marriage. And before we get into Jack's story, let me share a little bit with you about what a public accommodation law is, because these laws are the ones that state officials are now trying to use to coerce speech or to punish Christian business owners for declining to express messages in conflict with their core beliefs. Essentially, a public accommodation law is a law that forbids businesses from making distinctions in the services they provide based on a person's personal characteristics, their race, their religion, their sex, their national origin, and most important for today's conversation, their sexual orientation or gender identity. Public accommodation laws have a rich history in our country. So what you will not hear me say today is that public accommodation laws are constitutional in every application, but at the same time, you won't hear me say that public accommodation laws are unconstitutional in every application. They've served good purposes in our nation's history, most importantly in the civil rights era. When these laws were first initiated, they applied to few businesses and covered few personal characteristics. The most common examples were laws that forbid distinctions based on race or color, and they applied to transportation carriers, hotels, inns, restaurants. And those are good applications of these laws. But over time, governments have expanded them to apply to more businesses, including businesses that deal in speech, and they apply to cover more characteristics. And most importantly, states and local governments are now using these laws to compel speech. And that's why we're here this morning. And that's what Jack's cases were all about. The government was trying to force Jack to express messages that conflict with his core beliefs. So that's the background on what states are trying to do. We'll have some time for question and answer afterwards. So if you have some questions, write them down. We'd love to answer as many as we can after our conversation this morning. We'd be glad to do that. But let's get to Jack's story. Jack, you are a cake artist.
Thank you.
Most people in America know that right now. He's probably America's most famous baker, right? What does that mean to you, and what led you into designing and creating cakes?
Well, I never set out to design and create cakes. When I was in school, I just needed to graduate. And when I did graduate, I had no plans for college or anything, but I needed a job. And the man that lived across the street from me owned a large wholesale bakery. And my brother had worked there, my sister had worked there, my other sister babysat for his kids. I grew up with his son, and he was gracious enough to then hire me to work in the bakery. And I found that it was a very short time. I found that I really enjoyed working in the bakery. I liked the people, I liked the pace, obviously liked the product. It was just a lot of fun, and I fell in love with baking. But a couple years down the road, he bought out another bakery and brought in cake decorating, which I had never seen before. You know, you see it on all the TV shows, Food Networks and all that now, but back then it was fairly new and I'd never seen it. And I thought, this is something that I can do, because growing up, I always had a pencil in my hand. I was always painting, sketching, doing those kind of things. I loved art. When you got to, in junior high school, you get to the point where you get to choose elective classes. It was a no-brainer. I took anything that was in the art room. So to see those two that could be combined together, I knew that's what I was going to do. And I was going to, at some point in my life, open a bakery, and I was going to decorate cakes for a living. So.
And that you did. About 25 years ago, you opened Masterpiece Cake Shop in Lakewood, Colorado. Why did you choose that name?
Masterpiece Cake Shop came to me pretty early on, before we had any money to do anything like that. But to me, Masterpiece says art, and Cake Shop said cakes. It's pretty pretty simple, but it also reminds me, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he said that no man can serve two masters. And as I write masterpiece to this day, most every time I write masterpiece on a check or anything, I remember no man can serve two masters, and whose cake shop is this? So.
Jack, it's obvious that your faith affects everything you do at home, at church, and at work. How did you come to know Jesus?
I came to know Jesus when I was I'm thinking 23. I was working in this bakery. I worked nights. I would go home, work all night, and then go home during the day, sleep during the day. I was married and had a couple of kids. But there was also a bar across the street from the cake shop, or from the bakery, not the cake shop. The cake shop didn't exist then, but there was a bar across the street. So I would go over to the bar, have a couple beers with the guys. It was like a factory situation, so the night shift would get off. But one morning, I got off work, and one of the guys said, "You gonna head over to the sandbar?" And I said, "Oh, no, I think I'll just head on home," which I did. Hopped in my car and drove. We lived 8 to 10 miles from the bakery. And as I was driving down this one particular hill in Denver, in one of the suburbs where we lived, I was confronted with the Holy Spirit in my car. For whatever reason, I wasn't a drug-dealing, wife-beating, child-molesting alcoholic who woke up in the gutter and said, if you save me from this, then I'll serve you. I was, paying my bills, working, but when the Holy Spirit showed up, he pointed out to me my sin. And by pointing out my sin, I don't mean he said, you lied on Tuesday, so you're a liar, or you stole something on Thursday, so you're a sinner. He pointed out my sin. I lied because I am a liar. I stole because I am a thief. I sin because I am a sinner. And as a sinner, I needed a Savior. I need someone to stand before God in my place, and that was Jesus Christ. And I knew at that moment the truth of the Scripture, that Jesus was my Savior because of his perfect life, his death, and his resurrection, and him standing before the Father pleading my case. And I said, "You're right, I am a sinner. But let me clean my life up a little bit before, and you'll get a better deal." And he said, "You can't." I said, "You're right, I'm yours." So on my way home from work that day in my car, I gave my life to Jesus Christ. Which then, thank you. Which led to another obstacle. When I got to my house, our little apartment, I knew that my wife would be there, and if I told her, "Guess what? I've become a Christian today," that wouldn't be received as good news. As a matter of fact, I was pretty sure that she would conceivably walk out on me, and that would be the end of our marriage. Because just a few weeks before, my sister-in-law had merely invited her to attend church with her. And my wife blew up at her and was like, "You people are all hypocrites," or whatever. I don't know the conversation. I wasn't there, but it was enough so that my sister-in-law would probably not invite her to church again, nor invite anybody to church again. So I knew that this conversation wouldn't be received well. So anyway, I worked nights, and so I went in, made my greetings, whatever, and went to bed. And normally when I go to bed working nights, even now working days, I lay my head on the pillow and I fall immediately asleep. But God would not let me sleep. He said, "Go tell Debbie what you just done. Go tell her this decision." So for the second time in my young Christian life, which was minutes old, I decided to negotiate with God. The first one is let me clean up my life a little bit. This time it's like, let me get a good night's sleep before I tell my wife what I've done. He said, "No, go tell her now." I said, "No, really, I need a good night's sleep. You don't understand." So this conversation goes on for a little bit. And I acquiesced. I got up, went out to the kitchen where she was sitting at the table. And she looks at me surprised, like, "What are you doing up?" "I became a Christian today." She looked at me and she says, "Me too, 3 days ago." now we have something in common, but God had been working on both of us at the same time. And from that day to this, life has not been the same. Our goals at that time changed from paying the bills to raising 2 kids at that point, 3 a few months later, 3 kids who had learned to love and follow Jesus Christ.
Praise the Lord. We're so thankful that He loves us and that He has given His Son Jesus for us to rescue sinners like us. Every salvation story is a beautiful story. Since that day, Jack, you've tried to incorporate your faith in all aspects of your life. And that applies to Masterpiece Cake Shop just like it applies anywhere else. Mm-hmm. What are some ways that you incorporate your faith at the cake shop?
Well, at the cake shop, first of all, I serve everybody who comes in the store. I welcome everybody, and I'm being sued because the state is claiming otherwise. But I love the people who come into my store, and I don't care what their orientation is or what gender they identify as, what religion or even no religion. I love working with people. That's one of my favorite parts of that. So that's one of the ways that I incorporate my faith in my work, but I also want to treat my employees. The Bible teaches about servants and masters, and in this case, they're the servants. I'm His servant, but they're the ones who work for me, and I want to treat them in ways that show His love to them, pay them well, treat them with respect, and those kind of things.
And what are some ways that you minister to your customers just at the shop?
We have just a variety of people that come in. We have homeless people and people that come from different church backgrounds, so we can, donate products to different churches or just different things like that. But we also, at the beginning, my wife and I sat down, working out how we were going to open the bakery, those kind of things. One of the things that we decided is that there are certain cakes that we would not be able to create. One of them is Halloween cakes, this month being Halloween. That's a huge thing in the retail industry in general, but in the bakery in particular. You start selling Halloween cookies in September. You go to your grocery store now, you see pumpkins and stuff that have been out there for weeks. And that's a huge celebration, but we decided that there are things that we would not do that we didn't feel that would honor God. That was one of them. We wouldn't sell cakes with alcohol in them. That's fairly common in a nice bakery like what we had hoped to create. And 2 doors down from us now we have a business that's an Alcoholics Anonymous place where people go and meet and try and fight for their sobriety. So God was gracious in giving us that decision. So they don't have to worry when they come into the bakery that they can just pick out anything in the case. We don't do cakes that would denigrate other people or belittle other people, including people who identify as LGBT. I've had people call and request cakes in the last few years that say, could you write this, derogatory statement about gays on a cake? I said, no, I wouldn't do that, So I get to live out our faith in all those, just in the product, besides the way we treat our people and the employees and the customers.
In 2012, your world was turned upside down. Tell us what happened when Charlie Craig and David Mullins walked into your cake shop that famous summer day.
Yeah, it was July 19th, 2012. It was a Thursday. It was a beautiful summer afternoon in Colorado. I had 2 employees working for me, and normally the protocol would be that one of them is the first one to greet anybody who comes in the store. If she's busy, then the other one does, and if they're both busy, then I do. And that was the case when these 2 gentlemen came in. So I'm in the back, 2 girls up front, and they're both busy with other customers. And so I looked around the corner, saw that they were both busy, and one of them indicated that there were 2 men sitting in our wedding area at the consultation desk. And so I walked over and sat down and introduced myself to them. This one says, I'm David, and I'm Charlie. I'm Jack. What can I do for you? He said, we're here to look at wedding cakes. And one of them said that, and the other one said, it's for our wedding. And so I have to instantly try and figure out a way to graciously tell them, you're welcome in my store. I'll serve you anything, but I can't make that cake. What do I say? And I said, sorry guys, I don't do same-sex wedding cakes. And they looked at me like, what? I said, I'll serve you anything in the store. I'll make you other custom cakes. I'll make you birthday cakes, shower cakes. I'll sell you cookies, brownies, but I just can't make a custom same-sex wedding cake. They both stood up. One of them flipped me off, swore at me. They stormed out of the store just abruptly and crazy. And that's not what I expected at all. So I went back to the back, and just a few minutes later, the phone rang. Both girls were busy again, so it would be their jobs to answer the phone. Again, I'd be third in line. So the phone rang, I picked it up, and somebody on the other end says, are you the baker who just turned away the gay couple? I said, no, I'd never turn away a gay couple. I don't remember the conversation, but tried to make the point, I can't make this cake, but I would always serve anybody who comes in the store. And they got rude and obscene and swore at me and hung up the phone. And I told the girls, I think I'll be answering the phone for the rest of the afternoon, which is about 45 minutes and probably won't ring that much. But in the next 45 minutes, it rang another 5 or 6 times, the same kind of phone call. So obviously something had been triggered, and they were all calling me to condemn me and swear at me and tell me I'm not fit to live and whatever. So life got really crazy that afternoon. So I went home, told my wife what had happened, and I look at my email, and I'm getting emails, same things. You can find my email on my website. It's like, this is just crazy. I never imagined anything like this happening. And then a few weeks later, I get sued by the state of Colorado because of these public accommodations laws that Jake was saying that they were claiming that I had violated a public accommodations law and refusing to serve someone because of their gender, because of their sexual orientation.
Jack, what were some examples of the most threatening calls that you got in the days after Charlie and David left the shop?
I'd say one of the most threatening ones was a threat to my life. Somebody called me in the morning, and they said that they were coming down such and such a street, and they would be there pretty quick, and they had a gun. And they were going to shoot me. They were going to blow my head off. So my daughter works for me, and she has a 4-year-old at the time. And so I told them, you need to go hide in the back. I don't know if this is legitimate or not, but I'm going to call the police. You stay back in the back until I tell you to come out. So we called the police. The police came out, tried to trace the calls and stuff. Couldn't do that. And obviously I didn't get my brains blown out, but it was kind of a frightening situation. We had, all kinds of different things like that going on.
And that was just one example of the kinds of calls and threats that Jack received in the days and months following that summer day with Charlie and David at the shop. But a short time later, you mentioned that you received a complaint or a charge in the mail from the Colorado Civil Rights Division alleging that you had violated state law. What was going through your mind?
Well, I looked up the law. It was in the paper, in the papers that they'd sent. And I read, it says discriminate because of these things. And that's not what happened at all. I told these 2 men that I would serve them. Discrimination would be, in my mind, you're gay, get out of my store. But that would never happen. I'm glad to serve you, but this is a cake that you're asking for that I wouldn't make for anybody. There are a lot of cakes like that I just won't create for anybody. And fortunately, I'd already been connected with somebody from Alliance Defending Freedom who said that if you get these papers, contact us and we'll take care of that. And so that's how I officially got connected with ADF 3 days after David and Charlie came in, but officially started working with them on this level when those papers came in.
And many people know the story that happened after that charge came across your desk. When your case was before the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, you lost.
Yeah.
But during the proceedings, some of the commissioners described your faith as despicable and compared your plea for religious freedom to defenses that justified slavery and the Holocaust. How did that make you feel?
Well, for somebody in that kind of a position of authority to say that religious freedom was a despicable piece of rhetoric was stunning. It's like, it's in the Constitution. This is part of Constitution isn't a name, it's what constitutes our country. It's what makes it up. And for them to just not only ignore it, but to blatantly condemn it like that was one thing. But the one that got me most out of that, the three things that they said, was the despicable rhetoric and the Holocaust, or the slavery and the Holocaust, was the Holocaust because my dad fought in World War II, and he actually landed on Normandy, and he fought through France, and he fought through Germany. He was wounded in a mortar attack. They sent him back to England to patch him up, then sent him back into combat to finish up, while they're still fighting and stuff. And he was part of a group that helped liberate one of the concentration camps, one of the first concentration camps, Buchenwald. And he described the smell and the horror of that. And for them to compare not creating a cake for a same-sex wedding to the Holocaust was just ludicrous. It was crazy. But this is the people that we were fighting against.
You appealed to the Colorado Court of Appeals, but lost there too. Then the Colorado Supreme Court refused to hear your case, and that left the U.S. Supreme Court as the last hope for vindicating your First Amendment rights. What were you thinking as you weighed that final appeal?
I'm not sure how much people understand about the United States Supreme Court. I've learned a lot about it. But you and I don't have a difference of opinion to go through the courts. And I'm going to take you to the U.S. Supreme Court, and there we go. Now, they get 8,000 to 10,000 cases, present them to them every year, and they only take about 70. And they are very discerning in what cases they decide to accept. And for mine to come, from a lower court, the odds of them taking it are less than 1% anyway, and the odds seemed really, really small. And as we talked with the attorneys, they were telling me that, the odds of you being heard at the Supreme Court are really small. So we're not even sure if we should appeal there. I said, we're already not being heard there. What's the worst that could happen is we appeal and they tell us, no, we won't hear your case. No, the worst that could happen would be they accept your case and you lose. And that was a really sobering thing to know that if we went ahead and filed and they took the case and we lost, what it would mean. Because this is not about Jack making wedding cakes. This is about your freedom. It's about my daughter's freedom, my son's freedom, my grandchildren. And just how important this whole case became as we proceeded to go forward and wait for their decision whether to take the case or not. So it kind of weighs heavily on you.
And thank you for choosing to appeal your case. We are very thankful for that now. God was looking after it. But along the way, the Supreme Court kept you waiting. By the time the court finally decided to hear Jack's case, I think it had been relisted or set for consideration more times than any other case before it. Describe the moments right after you learned that the Supreme Court would hear your case, Jack.
Yeah, so there's a website, it's called SCOTUS blog, and SCOTUS is Supreme Court of the U.S. So SCOTUS blog is a site that I found out really follows the court closely. They're reporters, and they give a good picture of what's going on in the court. And they talked about my case for week after week, because I think the first conference is a meeting where all the justices get in a room, all 9 of them, there were 8 at that time, all 9 of them get in a room, nobody else, no clerks, no secretaries, nobody, and they decide which cases they're going to take. And so the first time my case was conferenced was in October, and they put it off, and then they put it off, and they put it off. And on Mondays, SCOTUS blog releases the results of the Supreme Court's work the week before, conferencing. Which cases did they accept? Which cases did they deny? So I was going on my computer every Monday morning, 7:30 Mountain Time, to see what was going on in the court. and if they'd granted the case or denied it. And so week after week after week, they just kept kicking it down the road. Like Jake said, it set a record for the amount of times that they had done that. And the very last week of the session, I turned on my computer and waiting for, written blog that comes up text lines, and I saw it on there, Masterpiece Cake Shop has been granted. And seriously, nobody thought that they were going to grant it, I don't think, because all the comments after that were all pretty surprised. I was more surprised than anybody, because you can see I get choked up as I talk about it, but I could not even speak. I had to text my wife, my kids, my family. We're going to the court, and finally I could talk a little bit, and there's only one person in the bakery to share it with, and it's a homeless guy who comes in every now and then. So I looked at him and said, "Hey, I get to go to the Supreme Court." And he looks at me and goes, "Yeah, I got to go to court on Wednesday." Yeah, but I don't need a parole officer, So it was fun. But so then things got really crazy that day. We had TV cameras, newspapers all around the shop. It was just a really crazy turn of events for them to take the case. But that very day then, an attorney in Colorado, not here, an attorney in Colorado called us up, and we've got just chaos and lots of things going on, and this attorney calls us up and requests that we would create a custom cake. And the custom cake would be blue on the outside and pink on the inside, and then we were told that those colors were to signify a gender transition, a change from male to female. Well, this cake has just become a message, and it's a message that I can't create. I'd be glad to create any other cake for this person that we would create for anybody. And we tried to convey that, and that just didn't work. So the person was unconvinced and filed a complaint with the same Civil Rights Commission that we had just, that we would eventually win in the Supreme Court against. And
be more on that case later. But unless you're in the Cruz family, you might not know what it's like to appear at the U.S. Supreme Court. So what was it like appearing before the High Court? What was going through your mind?
yeah. So we were granted the case in June, and then we went to the U.S. Supreme Court in December of 2017. And it was a beautiful day. It was cool. It was December. It was Washington, but the sun was out here and there, and it was a little bit cloudy, but it was really kind of a nice day. But when you go to the Supreme Court, it's not traffic court. This was a high-profile case, so the halls were filled with people. There was a rally outside. There were protesters. There were supporters. A lot of things going on, but nothing can really prepare you for going to the U.S. Supreme Court. You go through the hallways to get up into the courtroom, and you go through security like an airport type thing a couple of times. Go through there. You don't go in with anything but a pencil and a paper and what you're wearing. No cell phones, no Apple Watches, whatever they are, no electronics at all. And so the marshals are in the room, and they make sure that everything is really quiet. We're there for an hour before the thing started, and they wouldn't let us talk. We just basically had to sit there, quietly. At one point, my daughter was in the back. She was sitting here with a friend in between us and my sister, and one of the judges asked a question, and my sister reached around my friend to comfort my daughter, and the marshal said, "You will put your hand down." So you just sit there. It's a really impressive, awesome place, just the way they handle everything, but knowing also that by now we have 9 justices again. Neil Gorsuch had been confirmed. So you look up there on the bench, and there's Ginsburg and Kennedy and Roberts and all these people that you read about in the paper. It was pretty awesome.
And arguments were pretty intense that day. I think there were more questions asked of counsel that day at the U.S. Supreme Court than any other day for a case that term. So it was a very hot bench, so they say. What did you think walking out of the courtroom?
Well, let me say about the arguments. People ask me, was I, intimidated going up before the judge? And you don't do that. The attorneys do. So they prepare and they prepare and they prepare and they practice and they know exactly what the questions can be, because it's just a conversation between the 9 justices and the attorneys, whichever attorney is up there. Kristen Wagner is the lead attorney. Then she introduced a case, like in the case of Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission, I would like to say, and they interrupt and they ask a question. Well, why are you using this brief this way? And this argument to me looks like this. Why are you using this? And so they have to be able to answer all these questions nonstop for however long that they're up. It's just, it's intimidating. It's crazy to watch this, trying to tear you apart, trying to tear your case apart, and how well prepared and how smart these judges were, these attorneys were, and the judges were all prepared as well. But to know that God is in control over this whole situation. It says, in Daniel chapter 2, it says that God puts kings on thrones and takes them down, but he also puts justices on benches. He puts presidents in office. He puts commissioners on their commissions. So I know that God was in control of who was there and what was going to be said, and the outcome was in his hands. So then we finish all that up, and then we walk out, and you walk out of the steps, out of the courtroom, down the steps, and there's this rally, a whole bunch of people with signs and banners, and went over and did a press conference. I've got a picture standing with a microphone like this, and just a network of wires and all these reporters there wanting to know what you said, what you thought, what you felt, and everything like that. It's really pretty cool. In a crazy sort of way.
Well, in June of last year, the Supreme Court issued its decision ruling that you won. It was a 7-2 win in favor of Jack. And all praise to the Lord for that great result. And there were 2 questions before the court. The first question was, can a state use its public accommodation law to force a business owner to create speech or express messages in conflict with their core beliefs? And the second question turned on free exercise, the free exercise of religion. It was a free exercise claim. And the Supreme Court, in its decision, it didn't even reach the speech question. It was sufficient to decide the case on free exercise grounds. This decision certainly has implications for our speech arguments moving forward. But in Jack's case, the Supreme Court found that the state of Colorado, and in particular the officials on the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, that they were hostile to Jack and his faith. And they found 2 reasons for that. One was the horrible comments that I read to you earlier, describing Jack's faith as despicable and comparing his plea for religious freedom to defenses that justified slavery and the Holocaust. Justice Kennedy, when he wrote the opinion, he said those remarks were wrong, that they have no place in our society, and that it evidenced the state's hostility against Jack and his faith. And that was one ground for a free exercise violation. The second ground came from how the state treated Jack. Colorado treated Jack as a cake artist worse than any other cake artist in the state. During the course of litigation, there was a Christian man who visited 3 different cake shops near and around Denver, Colorado. And he asked those cake shops to create a custom cake with a Bible, with a message on those cakes supporting the biblical definition of marriage. And each of those cake artists declined to create that cake, citing that that cake would offend their deeply held beliefs, not religious beliefs, but otherwise. And the customer who requested those cakes filed a complaint with the Colorado Civil Rights Division, just like the 2 gentlemen did in Jack's case. But instead of punishing those cake artists, the state of Colorado said, hey, that's no problem. You guys thought that these cake requests were offensive to your beliefs and would promote messages inconsistent with what you believe. You have every right to decline to create those cakes. Well, when Jack's case finally reached the Supreme Court, Justice Kennedy, again, in his opinion, said, that's wrong. You can't extend this rule, this offensiveness rule, to protect 3 other Colorado cake artists for declining to create cakes that would express messages in conflict with their beliefs, and punish Jack for doing the same thing. That's another evidence of religious hostility against Jack and his faith. So, on 2 separate free exercise grounds, the Supreme Court ruled in Jack's favor. So, Jack, how did you hear about that decision, and what was going through your mind when you won?
I heard about the decision the same way I heard that they granted our case. I was at my computer on Monday mornings watching SCOTUS blog, and everybody, the conventional wisdom was that they were going to wait till the last day of session to announce the decision on my case, because that's the day that they announced that they were going to grant my case, the last day of the session the year before. And so it was a couple weeks before that, 3 weeks before the end of the session, I started watching SCOTUS blog anyway to see what was going on, and all of a sudden, there it is. We have Masterpiece, and it looks like they won. Okay, so I pull out my cell phone because I can't talk anymore. I started texting, and again, right away, people are driving by honking at it at the shop and waving and stuff, and TV cameras show up, and again, we won. But this is a really cool day. But it's also overshadowed because we also knew that there had been a complaint filed with this blue and pink cake, and so that wasn't out of the woods. And people are saying, how's it feel to win? Feels really good. That's all I can say, But then we get the complaint on the other one 3 weeks later, after we win 7-2. Then 3 weeks later, the Civil Rights Commission says they have probable cause to pursue this next complaint. So back to court we go.
Yeah, and like you said before, on the same day that the Supreme Court decided to hear your first case, just hours after news broke about that case, a Denver area attorney called you and asked for a custom cake with a blue outside and pink inside to celebrate that lawyer's gender transition. And that was looming in the background during Jack's whole case leading up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And then, like Jack said, 3 weeks after Jack won at the U.S. Supreme Court, Colorado came after him again, finding probable cause that he had violated state law for declining to create a cake that would express that message. But Jack, this time you didn't just sit back and wait for the fight to come to you, so to speak. What did you do?
This time we turned around then with ADF. We went to federal court and filed a lawsuit against the Colorado Civil Rights Commission because of their hostility. Jake can explain what legally, technically we did, but we sued the commission for their hostility to come after me again for this lawsuit.
So in that case, we went on offense. We said we don't need to go through another 6 years of litigation to finally re-vindicate Jack's First Amendment rights. We need to do something about this on the front end. So we filed a federal lawsuit against Colorado state officials who sat on the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and we asked that court to stop the state of Colorado from applying its laws to punish Jack for exercising his faith, for creating cakes consistent with his deeply held religious beliefs. And the state filed a motion to dismiss. They said, look, we have an ongoing state investigation. Federal court, please stay out of this. And typically federal courts do stay out of cases in that situation. But because of the facts in this case, it was obvious that the commission could not be trusted to handle Jack's case. And so the federal court kept the case in federal court and denied the state's motion to dismiss Jack's case. And that started a round of what in the legal world we call discovery. We could send document requests to the state saying, hey, can you give us documents that mention Jack Phillips or that concern your policy on how you interpret your public accommodation law, questions like that. And then we could also depose or ask questions to some of the state officials. Similarly, the state could ask Jack and us for documents that we had in our possession, and could even depose or ask questions of Jack and his employees. And we were in that back and forth for a couple of months. We'd ask for documents, and just a few days before Jack was scheduled to be deposed, the state handed over a recording. And on that recording, current Colorado commissioners were talking about Jack's Supreme Court win. It was 3 weeks after the Supreme Court issued its decision, and the commission had a public hearing. And that public hearing was recorded. And at that hearing, state officials adopted in full the exact same comments that the Supreme Court had just condemned. They said, we agree with those comments, and we're actually glad that the commissioners were transparent about what they believed. And so we got that recording, and we thought, wow, they have just adopted the same comments that the Supreme Court just condemned. That's
on tape.
On tape, and that has to be a violation of the First Amendment, the Free Exercise Clause, right? We just heard that from the Supreme Court. Well, a few days later, we show up for Jack's deposition, and what happened?
So we sit down in his conference room, and try not to be too boring about this, but there's this long conference table, and 3 ADF lawyers over here, and 3 state lawyers over here, and a court stenographer reporter here, and a court videographer down at the end of the table, like that, gonna record everything that you say and everything you do, and these lawyers are going to spend the day, up to 7 hours, trying to trick me and trap me and make me say something that they can use against me. And we prepared for this. ADF lawyers have prepared us. They're going to do this to me all day today, and then my wife tomorrow, and my daughter tomorrow afternoon. So it's just first and foremost on your mind. Make sure you're careful in everything you say. This is just going to be really something. But before they start, introductions are made, and then their lawyers turn to the stenographer and the videographer and say, you need to leave. We need to have a private conference. And so they turn to our attorneys and say, we're willing to dismiss the case against Jack if you drop your lawsuit against us. And if they dismiss the case against me, then our lawsuit is based on their suit, so it would just drop. But the thing is, they were willing to dismiss the case because they knew that these recordings were now public and that they would not only not be able to win, they would definitely lose, and rather than lose, let's just drop this. So they dismissed the case right there. And I walk out of that conference room, we're done. How do we process this? Where do we go from here? So go back to work and just start working out, well, what's life gonna be like now without 6 years of court ahead of us or whatever. So that was it until 3 months later, when the person who filed the original blue and pink cake complaint waited till after a 90-day time limit and then turned around and sued me personally. So now we're back in court with charges, same cake, but asking the court for penalties, court costs, legal fees, and all those things.
That lawyer is seeking over $100,000 in damages from Jack and his cake shop. And we've asked the court to dismiss that case, and that motion is before the court now. We're waiting on a decision. Should hear something back maybe in the next month or two, or it could be up to 6 months or so. But we're at the very early stages. We hope that the court will dismiss that case too. But through all of this, Jack, you feel more firmly rooted in your faith than ever. How would you describe your faith journey through the last 7 years, and what have you learned about God in this process?
Well, I've already mentioned Daniel chapter 2, where God is sovereign over kings and I believe justices and everybody else. So my faith in God has always been strong, but now I see it work out day to day in the way that he controls who's here and who's there and what they say, because nobody can make these commissioners say these things on tape. He's just, God is sovereign. But I also look back to the weeks before when the two men came in, and I think about Jesus' parable of the 10 virgins. You know, they're all asleep, and someone calls and says, the bridegroom is coming, and they wake up, and 5 of them don't have any oil, and 5 of them are ready to go. And they say, give us your oil. No, we can't share our oil with you because we might run out. There's a lot of facets to that parable. One of them that struck me was that all 10 of them were asleep. I was asleep. I was just running my business, doing the things that I need to do, but not really paying attention to what God wanted me to do. I now say, I have plenty of opportunities to share my faith just because of this, but I had those opportunities before. I just never took them. Now I take them, not every time, but a lot more often. But my faith has grown because I see that God is faithful in everything that he does, even using us.
And God is faithful, and that's what we've learned at ADF through this whole journey with Jack. It's been our honor to walk with and beside Jack and through these last 7 years now of litigation. And we're getting ready to transition into some questions and answers, but as we do that, I do want to let you guys know about something that could be useful for you and your ministry, especially if you're a pastor here. We have had the pleasure of defending Jack in many of these recent lawsuits, but one way that we proactively protect believers is that we come alongside churches, and we have this program called the Church Alliance, where you can have documents reviewed, where you can find out how to protect your ministry better, and those resources are free, and we provide those to you if you sign up on our website. And the website for that is www.churchebook.com. And if you're interested in learning how to protect your ministry better, I just encourage you to go download that free resource, and we'd love to chat with you about that. Again, it's www.churchebook.com.
Thank you, gentlemen.
I'd like to say one more thing real quick. It's like, I can't afford to take a lawyer to lunch, let alone have a staff like ADF working for us for the last 7 years. It didn't cost me anything. They represent their clients for free, but it isn't cheap. I've heard that it costs over 7 figures to get my case to and through the U.S. Supreme Court, and we're still going on. And I know if you go to adflegal.org and look at their website and look at their clients, I know a lot of them, and I know these people, and they are all strong Christian people, and ADF is defending all of them. And if you ever think of, what can I do with some extra money I've got? ADF.
We have probably enough time for 1 or 2 questions. Is anybody, we see somebody coming to the podium? Or the microphone.
Good morning. First of all, Jack, I want to say thank you so much. I know I speak for many of us when we say thank you for what you've gone through. I'd like to convey the depth of it, but I think I would need to text you because I would maybe not be able to get that out. Jake, I have a question for you, and thank you to ADF for all that you do as well. Just briefly, I do follow some of the things that ADF works with. Can you tell me a little bit about the case that you have with the 2 women that work on the invitations, whose case also went forward? How is that, in a nutshell, different from Jack's case? And what was the difference in what the Supreme Court decided? How was, again, that result different from Jack's case?
Great question. We recently got 2 big wins in cases just like Jack's. One before the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is just one level right below the U.S. Supreme Court, and then another at the Supreme Court of Arizona. And that's the one that you just mentioned. It's Brush and Nib Studio. It involves two women who create wedding art. One's a calligrapher, one's a painter, and they create wedding invitations and other types of wedding art. And under a local Phoenix ordinance, they would have been required to create wedding art to promote conceptions of marriage that conflict with their biblical view about what marriage should be. The law was trying to compel their art, compel their speech. And so instead of sitting back and waiting for a lawsuit to come to them, we proactively filed a lawsuit on their behalf, asking for protection, asking for the court to stop the state, or in this case the city, from forcing people to speak through use of their public accommodation law. Went all the way up to the Arizona Supreme Court, and the Arizona Supreme Court ruled in Brush and Nib's favor, saying, yes, the First Amendment protects your right to make decisions about what you say and what you don't say through your artwork. And now everyone in Arizona can live under the protection of that opinion. And that's big news. Similar case in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals involving two wedding filmmakers. We filed a pre-enforcement challenge on their behalf, and we asked the court to enter a protection that would stop the state of Minnesota from forcing them to create wedding films that would celebrate ideas about marriage in conflict with their deeply held religious beliefs about what marriage is. And recently, the 8th Circuit entered an order saying that the state has no business forcing people to promote messages in conflict with their faith through their public accommodation law. So these are two big wins, and they address the free speech issue head on, which was a natural implication from Jack's case at the Supreme Court.
I apologize. I said we had enough time for one or two questions. I was just instructed we had enough time for one question. We will, I know Jack and Jake are going to have to leave before the panel, but any questions that are still out there perhaps can be asked to our other speakers at that time, so I apologize. We are going to take a lunch break now. So one more time, our appreciation to all of our morning speakers. We are going to resume at 12:30.